Good morning. It's such a genuine pleasure for me to be with you in Indianapolis this morning. I have had a grand day yesterday getting to know a number of you and others related to this church and to this synod. And being in Second Church Indianapolis is a gift for any Presbyterian. Your church's history in our denomination is legendary. When we talk about churches that have made a monumental impact on our denomination, you're always one of them. Part of my role is to bring you greetings from the 10,000 congregations that comprise our denomination, and when I go to other churches, I greet them on your behalf as one of the other denominations too. So I do that, hoping that you know how much you are valued and appreciated. Now, Lewis has admitted that we've known each other a long time. And he was a wet behind the ears seminary intern when we first became acquainted. I wondered then if he would ever amount to anything. I still have questions. And if you don't know him, that if you don't give him a hard time before he gets hold of you, then you've missed the mark. So that's why I was taking advantage of that second. I love Lewis, and in all honesty, I admire and value him more than I can share. His wit and his wisdom, combined with his sincere faith, are a unique combination of gifts, but also have enabled him to have an enormous influence on everything where he has chosen to become involved. Having this reunion with him and Bunny is a true gift to Peggy and me, and sitting with his son a few weeks ago at Princeton Seminary was an added bonus. There are a number of you in this congregation who I have known or worked with over the years, and I treasure those relationships immensely. But if I start naming that, I'm afraid I won't get around to what we're here to do, and that's to talk about today's Bible passage. Its passage is a very familiar one. Rather than reading it to you, because most of us learned it in Bible school or Sunday school over the years, I'm going to just share it with you and maybe even abbreviate it a little bit. But I would ask you to take the scripture passage and either put it in your mind or carry your bulletin home, and either later today or sometime this week revisit it. Read the whole passage and think about God's words as they are shared with us in the book of John. You see, I know that all of us on this fifth Sunday after Easter are in the midst of still trying to figure out what we're going to do as Christ followers. That's what the disciples were doing. They had gathered in the upper room, frightened. We are told they locked themselves in because they were afraid of the Jews. They were not sure what in the world was happening. The Jesus, the Savior, whom they had chosen to give up everything for and to follow, had been crucified, and he had appeared to them, but they still were finding this to be an overwhelming experience. I don't know, I would guess that like me as a human being, they might have hoped that when Jesus said that he was going to die on the cross, that he didn't really mean it. And they might have thought, yes, you're going to be resurrected again, we believe you, Jesus, but it's so hard to comprehend what that means. And then to have had him appear a couple of times, can you only imagine the confusion in their minds as they were going through grief and joy and anxiety and frustration and perplexity? What in the world are we going to do? So as Lewis shared with the children, Peter said to them after a while, I'm going to go fishing. Fishing is something he knew. It's something they knew. It was a part of many of their livelihood, many of the disciples' livelihood. And others had fished and would fish as a part of just the life that they lived. And so when Peter said, I'm going fishing, I imagine the other says, well, we don't want to be separated from each other. We're going with you. And fishing is a great way for us to get our minds off of whatever it is we've been thinking about. So they left and they went fishing in the evening, and they fished all night, and they just didn't catch a thing. And at dawn, a figure appeared on the shore about 100 yards away. Now, some people say it's strange that people didn't recognize that it was Jesus, but think about it. 100 yards is a football field. If it's just the sun is just coming up or the sunlight is just coming out, and we're at the other end and we've been fishing for the night, And we see a man, we're not expecting it to be Jesus, and standing on the shore, so it stands to reason that they wouldn't have recognized him. And this man hollers out, "Have you caught any fish?" And the disciples said, "No, we haven't caught any, no luck at all." And then this stranger says, "Well, cast your nets on the other side of the boat." Now, for us who've heard this Bible story a long time, that sounds like, well, of course, a real simple thing. You pick up the net and put it on the other side. But when you think about it, it's an extraordinary situation. First of all, these fishermen had rigs. These nets weren't just small little nets. They were big nets. And there were ways in which they would place them into the water and pull them in. And you always fished on the right-hand side of the boat. So to have a stranger tell them to cast your net on the other side of the boat, first of all, was interesting. Secondly, the fact that they listened to the stranger is an amazing thought. Why on earth would these seasoned fishermen listen to this man? But they did. They cast their nets on the other side, and then you know the story. There were so many fish, they couldn't pull them in. There were just so many, they had to lug them. And all of a sudden, one of the disciples recognized Jesus, and he says, "Look, it's the Master." I can't imagine what that must have felt like. Can you imagine these people who loved Jesus so much and had walked with him and ministered with him, suddenly realizing there he was again, appearing for the third time after he died? Well, Peter, of course, Peter, who was always impetuous, always doing something almost immediately, jumped out of the boat. First of all, they say he put some clothes on. I don't know whether he'd taken his shirt off to get suntan. It was the night, but maybe it was hot and humid. But he jumped out of the boat, and he swam and ran and got to the shore, and there was Jesus. And the others came along with the boat, pulling the net and all the fish. And they all got to shore, and there was evidently a lot of talking. And, "Oh, Jesus, we're so glad to see you. We just didn't expect to see you here." And then they said, "We brought fish." And Jesus says, "I've already prepared the fish. I've caught the fish, and I have bread here cooked for you for your breakfast." So they sat down and ate it. And then later there was a conversation between Jesus and Peter about, "Do you love me?" which we all participated in a little while ago. And I'm going to come back and visit that in just a bit. But what possible connection could there be between this story and who we are as people of faith today? Well, for one thing, we can identify with the disciples at this point because we know that following Jesus is an extraordinary privilege and opportunity, but to imagine what it was like to see and be with someone we've loved so much who's been resurrected must just be overwhelming. We're also living in a time when we are being told that we are to be afraid of what is ahead. And the disciples were afraid. We're told here today that we should be afraid of possible terrorist attacks. We're told to fear people who look different from us or who believe differently from us. We're told that the most important thing we need to do is to identify and prepare for the worst case scenario. And some of you have served in our military or worked for our government. Others of you may be protectors of the people as elected officials or in some other capacity. I'm so thankful for the many ways that you have and are protecting us from the dreaded risks which we face. And I'm not taking them lightly, and none of us should. But I also know that fear can be the direct opposite of being faithful. In fact, in the military, one is taught that fear can be the ultimate negative. Operate from a position of strength, not fear. Once you fear, you become vulnerable. Having faith and trust is a major part of who we are called to be as Christians. And living our lives in a state of dread and fear is a part of that message. In fact, I would venture to say that fear is the antithesis of faith. For the past 22 months, I've had the privilege of traveling to 16 countries and 38 states, representing our denomination, and also mediating discussions about how the church and governments can cooperate and help improve the quality of life for all of God's children. in Iraq and in Lebanon, along the Syrian border with Presbyterian ministers who had risked their lives to come and meet with me. One had even left his home that day after the kitchen had been bombed. In Jordan and Palestine and Israel, I've seen the horrors of terrorism at its worst. And in South Sudan and Ethiopia, I walked through tent villages with tens of thousands of refugees, of people who've been ousted from their homes by hostile people, filled with threats and even the death of their loved ones. But their faith was exemplary, amazing, inspiring. And just 2 weeks ago, I returned from a pilgrimage with Syrian refugees where I met with officials from Greece and Hungary and Germany who are all seeking ways to address the enormous influx from Syria and Afghanistan. And I went to settlements which, while we were there, were turned from being places of hospitality for those who were fleeing their countries to being prisons where folks were going to be turned back to make the trip home where their life was going to be threatened once more. It's an awful situation. And so many of our sisters and brothers around the world are living in that kind of horror. So what are we supposed to do? How can we do anything? Can we make a difference? Are these people being unfaithful because they have run away afraid? Absolutely not. But if you could see the faith and hope which they hold in their hearts, you would be as impressed as I. They're living examples of how one turns the worst possible events that could occur in one's life into a virtual wellspring of hope and survival and faith. Fear is the enemy when we let it rule us and when we give up on God. So we must do something differently than we have in order to care for our sisters and brothers. Or, without meaning to sound simplistic, we can't do anything if we aren't willing to cast our nets on the other side of the boat. Now let's turn for a moment to our own denomination. First of all, it's important for you to realize that the reason I was invited to go to these countries was because, as moderator of our denomination, our church is viewed with extraordinary gratitude and love and faith on the part of our sisters and brothers around the world. In fact, when I went to the Middle East, it was the Presbyterian Church USA and the Pope, the Roman Catholics, that were invited to send our representatives to meet with him because they said, you brought us the word, you have stood by us throughout our whole lives, we don't think you're going to abandon us now. Please go back home and share with your faith communities that we know you're there for us and with us. And I sure hope we are. Now, as we look at our own denomination and see that we too are going through a time of transition, we might even say that there are a number of us in our church who fear our ability to survive. And as I say regularly, it is a fact that the church of my childhood, the church that I grew up in, Lakeside, where Lewis did his internship, is no longer the living, vital congregation that it was. We built a new sanctuary, and the first Sunday and the Sundays thereafter, we had to place chairs in the aisle because so many people were coming. Our youth group would have as many as 100 people on Sunday night, and we weren't one of the large churches. We were a relatively medium-sized suburban church. But that's what was happening in our churches, and that is just not what's going on today. Often I'm asked in my travels as moderator if I believe we're dying, and my answer: the church that I grew up in has been dying, but in its place is something significant and meaningful and still being understood and discovered. It's very much alive, and its primary organs are healthy. You see, whereas our denomination is indeed losing members, the facts that have been shared about why we're losing members have been spread by the by the media. Boy, is that coming into politics. By the liberal media? I didn't mean to do that. By the general public media, and also by our dissenters, by people who are concerned about us and don't believe that we are following God's will as a denomination. They're being shared by those who want us to give in to the fear of our mortality as a denomination, who want us to believe we're not living up to God's rules and regulations. They are people who have chosen to be our judges rather than our fellow, albeit sinful, human siblings. But we Christians know there is life after death. We know that God is in control, and if God wants the PCUSA to survive, God will ensure that that will happen. And we also know as Presbyterians that the main reason in our decline from membership is not because we've made decisions about social issues like gay marriage, which have caused folks to leave, although we have indeed lost members over some of those schisms in the church, and I'm not minimizing the impact of that or the sadness of those losses, but the statistics say we are losing members no more than other mainline denominations and less than the mega churches are losing members this day. And in fact, our percentage of losses are considerably less than some. Statistics say that over 50% of the reason Presbyterians are no longer on our church rolls is because they have become nuns. And I don't mean N-U-N-S. I mean the N-O-N-E-S's, the box that we fill out on our preference form when we are talking about who we are as religious people. And instead of checking Presbyterian or Christian or whatever, the biggest, fastest growing box are the nuns. And therefore, what are we as people who are not nuns going to do about that fastest growing group? I heard statistics just this past week that if all of the nuns in our nation were to come together into one country, it would be the fifth largest nation in the world. Fifth largest nation in the world, people in the United States who classify themselves as nuns. So what are we going to do about that? How are we going to handle who we are becoming? Well, folks, first of all, we don't need to measure our success in quantity. Jesus had 12 disciples. Look at what they did. Quantity is not the measure of success in the church. In many of our businesses it is. In so many other aspects of life it is. In church it's the quality. It's the core of what we can do, how we can be Christ's disciples. And if we start believing that we're not successful purely because of numbers, then we are giving in to that fear that I was talking about earlier. So we need to become a new church, a new body, and what's going to happen to us as we do that? Well, I guess it's like we are casting our nets on the other side of the boat. We just won't know until we try it. And how do we go about doing this? How does Second Presbyterian Church, Indianapolis, one of the most influential congregations in our entire denomination, go about casting nets on the other side of the boat, especially when you've been so successful in the ways you have already been fishing? Will you be pew sitters? Will you rest on the laurels of what you have done? Or will you be open to change? Will you embrace the opportunity to make a difference? The possibilities are only bound by your imagination. And in this transitional environment in our church and our society, you're going to be in the business of moving from what you have been, though a very successful model, into what God is wanting you to be for the future. I've gone onto your web page and had a chance to tour your wonderful facilities and see and learn about so many of your programs and the exceptional and numerous ways in which you minister to this community and beyond. You do so much good with homeless, with hungry, in your counseling programs, providing clothing for people who need it, and other support systems. The list goes on and on. But do these ministries effectively represent who you are as you move to the future, or have they just represented what you have felt in the past? Are you willing to get outside of your comfort zone a bit and determine who you're going to be? We human beings like our comfort zone, And even you in this very special place must at times fall into the pattern when people start saying, well, let's try it this way, by saying, no, we're going to do it this way because it's successful and we've always done it that way. When you do that, I want you to think about the story we read from the book of John today, or that I shared with you. Let's look at part of it again. It's when they were on the shore with Jesus, and when they felt that they had done something that they weren't expected to do and been quite successful in it, that they started recognizing Jesus. And then they went in, and when they got there, they found that even though they had been doing something differently, Jesus had already done it before them. And he was there with the food, ready to serve them, saying, yes, I'm asking you to catch fish, but I'm not asking you to do it alone. I'm going to be there. In fact, I'm going to precede you. I'm going to be there before you. Come on and risk. Cast those nets on the other side of the boat. You see, my friends, we are all called to be disciples, and what matters is whether or not we're going to see that guy standing over on the other side of North Meridian Street, asking if you've caught any fish, or maybe instead asking if you've done anything to make the world a better place. Have you done anything that matters, or is church just another one of your many obligations? No, my friends, what you're doing today is similar to casting a net on the right-hand side of the boat as we face a new world and a new society and a new body of people saying they need what we have to offer, even if they don't know how to express it in words. It's not a time when we can any longer sit back and enjoy those fruits of our labors over the years and continue to do what we have done. We're not being called to do things the same old way. In fact, we are being called to do things oftentimes in just the opposite way. We're still supposed to catch fish, but we're supposed to do it differently. And instead of finding that threatening, that can be exciting. That can be wonderful. And even Jesus modeled that by the way he instructed his disciples to handle their task in this new and different way. And he's there with us too. We are not alone. We need to do the work, but not without the support and assistance, and even by having Jesus proceed for us and prepare the way in very unique and extraordinary manners. And do you remember what happened next? That's when, after they'd eaten, they sat down and Jesus had the conversation with Simon. And he said, Simon, do you love me? And Simon Peter said, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And then he asked him a second time, do you love me? And Simon Peter said, Lord, you know I love you. And at the end of both of those times, Jesus had said, well, feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. And then, bless Pat, he asked Peter a third time, do you love me? Well, Peter was a little bit irritated by this, the Bible says, and I can understand that. Peggy and I have been married almost 50 years. In a few weeks, it'll be our 50th anniversary. And we still ask each other at times because we like to hear it. You love me, honey? You love me? It's nice to be assured. But frankly, I think if I were to ask Peggy that 3 straight times in a row, she'd wonder what I was up to. And Peter, red-headed, hot-headed Peter, didn't like the fact that he was asked that question by Jesus. And he said, yes, Lord, you know I love you. In fact, you know everything. Why are you even asking me that question? You know how much I love you. And then Jesus said one more time to take care and feed his sheep. And then he shared a few more things that Peter didn't realize had to do with his potential death or how he would die later. But he ended that by saying, follow me. Follow me. So Peter had to understand that what Christ was asking him to do was something that was different from what he thought he had been doing. And I think that's what he's saying to you as a church today and to us as a denomination. Second Church Indianapolis, you've been blessed with an amazing gift of resources. You have the money and the facilities and talent in your membership to do more than almost any other Presbyterian church, and frankly, more than most any Protestant church in our country. So I ask, says Jesus, do you love me? Are you doing these things for my sake? Are you feeding the sheep for the right reasons? Are you leaving the work up to others because you have so many people to carry the load? Or is each one of you accepting your part of the responsibility to make a difference in my name? You individually, you specifically, are you doing your part to follow me? But also remember that he's not asking us to do that by saying it will be fun and exciting. He didn't say all you have to do is work hard, do good things, and everything in the church or whatever else will be glorious. He knew better than that. He knew that each of us gathered here today and those yet to come are going to need to shed some of our comforts from the past and be willing to be taken to places we may not even want to go, but always remembering Jesus is already there. He's with us. He's just ahead. He's right around the corner. Do you see him? Look, he's right there, waiting, expecting us to cast our nets on the other side of the boat, and then saying, "Follow me." Jesus is waiting for you on the shore, whatever that shoreline is. Are you listening? May you do so today and forever. Amen.